you try to induce people to do to behave in ways that benefits them. Norm nudging is a little bit different because with norm nudging, we care about behavior that benefits the community, not just a single individual. And so what we do is we nudge. What does it mean we nudge? We give people information about what other people do and or what other people approve or disapprove of, okay, in order to induce better collective behavior. So nudging, norm nudging works through something we call social comparison. I compare myself. I see what other people do, what other people approve or disapprove of. Now, there are some crucial things that you have to keep in mind. First, the target behavior you want to change must be interdependent, and I'm coming to that in a moment. Second, the behavior of others. Who are these others? These others must be people that the people we want to change the behavior of care about, okay? They can identify with them. They meet people in their network. There are people who matter to the decision maker. This is very important. And that is why I always recommend in my work to study also to analyze the network of people that of whom you want to change a behavior. So target behavior have to be interdependent. I asked Naoko to show a slide, okay, that that is part of the work I do. That is very important. Okay, if you can share the screen with the slide, I can tell you why I want to show you these slides. Because interdependence simply means that the preference for performing a particular behavior will be conditional on having certain social expectations. They can be expectation of what other people do, expectation about what they approve or disapprove of, but these social expectations, social because they are about other people, okay, the social expectation will matter to my choice. And here you have a very rough, but very important distinction that for me, that I do norm nudging is very important, is between independent and interdependent behavior. Now, peace and security, what you want to do, for example, we want to act on situation where there is disarmament, integration, there is still violence maybe in post-conflict areas and you want to curb the violence, etc. So one thing you have to understand is what motivates these people you want to reach with your action, with your message. Are they motivated by what other people do or believes, etc., or not? And let me give you some example. Independent behavior. Sometimes we do things because of customary habits. We keep doing that. Like we open umbrella when it's rain, it's a custom, we do that, and we all do the same thing because it fulfills a basic need not to get wet. And most people do that. And we expect other people to do it. Of course, if you ask me, will other people use umbrellas? Yeah, I think so. But does this expectation influence my choice? No, zero. My choice is independent of what I think other people do. The same for truly moral choices. I would never harm an innocent person. It's repugnant to me. I won't do that. And whether other people do it or not, whether they approve or disapprove me for doing that is totally irrelevant to my choice. So typically customs and moral rules are example of independent behaviors. Now, norm nudging, it goes to the right side, is interdependent behavior. What does it mean? It means that either you know, that we care about what other people do, let's say, and these are descriptive norms. An example of descriptive norms are very many, are fashion, fads, convention, traffic rules, are all descriptive norms. And what we care about is just what other people do. We want to coordinate with them. We want to do like them. Social norms are very different. And usually your norm nudging has to do with social norms. Why do we have social norms? Because there is a tension very often between my welfare and society welfare, my well-being and the well-being of the community, okay? There is scope for opportunistic behavior. There is scope for selfishness. And social norms are there to keep us on the right track. And so for a social norm to exist, social expectations have to be there. Two types. One is empirical. You know, I want to know that most people behave in the appropriate way, but also normative. I want to know that there is approval for doing the right thing, for behaving like that. And very often social norms are accompanied by sanction. When there is punishment, we can suspect there is a social norm that has been violated. So when we talk of norm nudging, remember, we are on the right side, interdependent behavior. You can eliminate the slides at this point. People can see my face. Okay. Now, one very important thing is what does it mean to do norm nudging? Okay. To do norm nudging means to create new expectation in people or to change their expectation, okay? And what does it mean to change people's expectation, okay? What do we do in order to change people's expectations? We can do many different things. We can give them information through the media, for example, about what other people do. Sometimes programs called edutainment do exactly that. They want to show what people do, that people do better things than what people are doing now, and that it is in fact successful, is rewarding to do different things. Messages are very important. We can use some examples. For example, you have to be truthful. So suppose that you know and people expect that lots of people don't pay taxes. And so you cannot go to people and say, oh, 90% of people pay their taxes. What are you doing? Because they know this is not true. So what you can do in those cases, and I just give you an example, is highlight two things. Either small groups of people that pay their taxes and there is some sort of reward to that, even practical reward. So they see it's not that bad, you know, to behave correctly. Or you can show, and I do that a lot in the work I do in India, show people intention is a dynamic type of message. I show you that people intend, for example, to pay their taxes on time, and people believe that. And it has some significant effect. Now, I was discussing with Naoko. She had some questions about, you know, do expectation, can always working on expectation have a good effect? This was an important question. And my answer is not necessarily, not necessarily. So norm nudging is not a panacea, is not you know, a medicine for every possible ill. One very important point that people have to keep in mind is that to respond in a positive way to these messages, we need to trust the messenger. And also, in the case, for example, of public health, we have to trust also the message behind it. For example, if you don't trust scientists, I've shown in 9 different countries, I did a big, with lots of colleagues, a big study on norm nudging. Even if you are successful in convincing people that lots of other people are behaving in the right way, they stay home, they respect social distance and so on and so forth, if they don't trust science, they won't care. Okay, so trust is a very important part of the message. Now let's go back to your peace and security. And here is the government that tries to send certain messages. Now the question is this messenger trusted? Will people trust that those who send the message don't have some secondary goal? Okay, that is not going to benefit them. So you have to keep in mind, it's very important, that trust and how to build trust. And I tell you, in a situation where there has been war, there has been violence, trust is almost non-existent. And so what you need to do, the first thing to do is to build trust. Norm nudging will not be successful if there isn't trust, okay? In the messenger and the message, both. I mean, it depends, but the messenger is very important that is trusted. Do you have any other questions?
Christina, yes, that's great, Christina. Thank you so much. So you quickly went through the description of the different types of behavior and the decision-making process in each person's mind, and how it is actually dependent or conditional to their social expectation or information on what others do or what others believe. I would like to turn to Andres, who has been actually utilizing norm nudging approaches in the context of DDR. Andres, how you are managing their social expectation when you are doing a norm nudging approach in DDR?
Awesome, Naoko. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's an incredible privilege to share this with Christina, since she is the inspiration for all the work that's being done, understanding that when we talk about peace and security, we are basically talking about the importance of our perceptual system, the way that humans cope and tame uncertainty as a central factor to define, in a sense, responses towards a dangerous environment, especially when things are, basically disrupted by violence for a long time, as it is my case study, that is Colombia. And as you can imagine, it's a protracted conflict. You have all the components for a collective tragedy there. But especially norm nudging has been very useful in order to understand that policies and programming need, in a sense, to take into account the importance of how our brain and our social mind works, as I was saying, to tame uncertainty. And there's something very important about the contribution that Cristina Vicari has made to the field of behavioral science, and especially to programming initiatives that want to innovate through the design of interventions that can tackle the problem of social conformity, especially that tendency we had as a default mechanism, as a psychosocial, we would say, economic or very economic in the sense of how our brain works, and the idea that when things are uncertain, maybe going with your group and being influenced what the persons who are important to you and that you look up for, like to take hints of what to do. As Christina was saying, the role of social expectations come in and can have positive or, as we would say, perverse effects for a long time. So in this sense, the work of, tackling peace and security issues with social norms, it's not new. We have seen practitioners doing this for a long time, but in a sense has not been measured. And that's why Christina's work is so important, because it has allowed us to have a framework, but also ways to understand if there's causality behind the ways that we can tackle violence through reference networks, and especially using social expectations as a way to bring in preventive and efficient ways to buffer pain and basically extinction of groups, of human groups. So there, Naoko would be what I say, the importance of bringing norm nudging into the field of peace and security, especially on the field of the new field. I would call that way. I'll be bold and call it that way. That is peace science, right? And it's the idea that we can intentionally design programs that can be piloted and scaled up with hopefully successful results in terms of helping these three phases that you were talking when we're talking about DDR, but especially when we talk about opportunities that are very short in terms of time to get people to basically move into, as Christina was saying, a coordination system that can allow people to gain two things that are very important from this perspective. One is like to tame those meta perceptions. In Christina's framework, we will call that social expectations, especially the belief about what others do and what you're expected to do in that type of context. So it's very important. And I think, as Christina was saying, there are new ways to tackle those situations using edutainment, using narratives, using art-based interventions that could be really powerful. And to end my first insight on this is very important to understand that as Christina was saying, this is not like a magic trick you can do. This needs to be well done. This needs to take some, maybe in a cost-effective manner, but you need to pilot these interventions and to see that ethically you are not changing something that people are not expecting to change, even though you're talking about violence.
That's very interesting, Andres. I have to ask one question about the risk of stigmatization in norm nudging approaches. The practitioners in development, in humanitarian, in any areas are very aware of the risk of stigmatization. But a little bit step back from the solution-oriented discussion. Let's discuss about it more conceptually. How this stigmatization happens, how does it impact different kinds of people? What is the best way to conceptually mitigate the risk of stigmatization? Christina.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot about that in my work, especially with gender issues, because with gender issues, you are trying to promote, the image of a woman who can study, who can work, who can be successful, who can overcome the traditional strictures of women's life. The problem is that in many societies, many of these societies are very traditional, and women are homemakers. Women take care of the children. Women take care of the home. Women take care, especially in India, I saw a lot in villages, take care of the old mother-in-law, father-in-law, etc., etc. So women have a huge burden. And though we can try to help younger women, to try to avoid child marriage, keeping them in school and blah, 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 we can leave behind a lot of other women that have dedicated their life to the family. And this, I think, is dangerous, okay? Because they may feel, I'm not good enough, I'm not worth enough, I'm not taken care of, okay? And this is very, very important. And what I saw that was very interesting with microfinancing, they move microfinancing from men to more women because women take care of the family, they take care of the children, etc. And it's very interesting because they were offering, the successful cases I have seen, and there are many of them, they were offering women funding to buy animals or, to set up a small home, micro factory, if you will. They do textile and so on and so forth, without putting down the role of the woman in the family. So it is very interesting. These women were never left behind, if I look at that. So what we have to be very, very careful when we try to implement these new programs that give people, that promote, if you will, an image of, success, you can aspire to that, etc., etc. We have to be very careful about what sort of values these people or these women have, and not putting them down, okay? Because I think that nudging, in a way that promotes a very good image, but is an image that may leave a lot of people behind, well, that is a problem. So we have to be very sensitive and very careful about the values of the community and never minimize them, but work around them, basically. This is my view and what I have done, actually.
That is very interesting, Cristina. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we will open the floor for you very soon. So if you have any questions, please jump in. I think it's a great opportunity that academia and the practitioners like us are interacting with each other. So while our colleagues are thinking about the questions, I would like to ask the last question to both of you. So based on what you described from your conceptual philosophical perspective, so there are a lot of potential and also risk and the challenge of norm nudging approaches. And from your perspective to practitioners, what is the best way for us to utilize and integrate these norm nudging approaches in the best way to our work? So I was asking a lot to Cristina, so maybe turn to Andres.
Andres, yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. I think, you know, we are in a time that this type of evidence-based approaches are really needed to change things. I think Cristina's contribution to the field has been awesome since, as many of us on the field of behavioral sciences have been a little bit concerned about the idea of and the ethics of basically, and the, I would say, in a sense, the mistrust on approaches that, in a sense, get people to do things that they don't really want to do. So I think norm nudging is an incredible way to understand how to shift what we will call malpractices or perverse behaviors that can have long-lasting effects in society, but especially doing it with people through voluntary change. So I think that's very important, Naoko, in terms that if you can manage to bring in the evidence-based approaches to programming, and the idea that you can have an ethical view of when is a good time to propose, not to impose, but to propose change within reference networks of people, as Cristina was describing, as it has happened in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, through malpractices such as FGM and other type of what we would call like cultural mechanisms. I think we will have a new field that has not really been tried before in the world. So I think it would be great to all the colleagues here to get this possible idea that we need to shift from the standard views not only about human behavior, but especially of organizational design of interventions. And that's why I think the norm nudging approach could be you know, a groundbreaking thing to do in a time that is, we need people to, in a sense, get inspired by this type of changes that come within the culture and not externally.
Thank you, Andres. Cristina.
Yeah, you know, your issue is very much about peace and cooperation, etc. And you work on situations in which there was no peace, there have been conflict. And in particular, when there is conflict, there is in-group, out-group conflict. And so the big question for you is, and you're in a situation of great uncertainty and lack of trust, completely. And so how do you go from what we call a zero-sum game, in which I feel if you win, I lose, if I win, you lose, okay? There is no joint victory. How do you go from a frame of mind of a zero-sum game to a frame of mind of cooperation? This is your problem. This is the essence of your problem, okay? How you change people's frame of mind. And I said, you have to reduce uncertainty, because the more uncertain I am, the more zero-sum. I put down my gun. Will they put down their guns? I don't trust you. Okay, you put me in jail. Maybe they take over my land. God knows. Okay, so the greater uncertainty, the more this mentality of zero-sum. So you have to lower the uncertainty. Lowering the uncertainty means increasing trust. Okay, trust in the government, trust in the negotiation process, trust that the other group, my enemy, okay, will be willing to cooperate for a higher end. This is what we have to do. So norm nudging per se can take many different forms. Andres was very clear about that. Okay, the question is, you have to keep in mind uncertainty, trust, lack of trust, great uncertainty, zero sum, how you move people to the other side. How you move people to the other side through norm nudging. For example, I am a big supporter of soap operas. And there is a great example in Uganda. Somebody I know, Lady Paluk, did a wonderful soap opera. Now, I don't know how long the effect will last. This is another question, the longitudinal effects of the intervention. But it was an intervention of, in which there is a soap opera, love story between a Tutu and a Hutsi, etc. And that had an enormous effect on people because it humanized the enemy. They think, oh, these guys can love each other. Okay, it's a Juliet and Romeo story, basically. And so through the soap opera, you can humanize the enemy. You can see, you can coordinate and cooperate, and you can see that there are enormous benefits doing that. So you have to start making people think that it is possible, that it's not so terrible, that you won't be killed, and so on and so forth. This, I think, is important. So you have to think with this in mind.
That is very interesting. And when we tend to think about, well, when we hear the word trust, we tend to think about the government's activity or international organizations' activity. But that role can be played by media. That's a very interesting point. I see my colleague is asking what is the exact name of the soap opera in Uganda. It would be great if you can just put it on the chat. We are also receiving a question about the women empowerment. Does norm nudging enhance the working of this organization, especially when biosecurity and security are concerns, double whammy situation? These are both very interesting points. At the same time, I would like to ask one more question in the sense that, just for the clarification, Christina, you were talking about trust a lot.
Yeah.
And also we were talking about the social expectation. When I personally heard the word trust, it means that this person is doing right, or if this person is doing the good thing to us. So that is not all about the trust. It's more about kind of like a predictability or certainty of this person, this organization should behave in that way. And that's why the sharing more information about their behavior or humanizing matters. Do you actually have a much broader understanding about what trust means in this behavioral science context?
This is a very good question. You mentioned predictability, okay? Now, to have predictability, you need to have knowledge. So people need to know what this organization has done in the past. They need to know that there are good reasons to believe they will continue behaving in a positive way in the future, that they have been successful in the past, and so on and so forth. Often, there is very little predictability because you are intervening in a completely new way, maybe with a new group in a situation where there was no such intervention before. So there is very little predictability because the world would be easier and nicer if we had predictability, but we have uncertainty most of the time. Okay, so you have to deal with uncertainty. What does it mean, trust? It means many things. One thing that I can tell you help with trust is when you do an intervention, you have to be very, very careful not to challenge the core beliefs that these people have, because they will not trust or listen to you. Okay, so trust is not just an issue of predictability. I know they will do the right thing, etc., because often we cannot do that. There is very little predictability. So the question is, what you can ask is this organization, the government that tries to implement certain policies, are they corrupt? Will they really implement these policies? Do they want to implement this policy for their own benefits because they have a second, a secondary goal, etc.? These are all questions that people are not stupid. Even people in remote villages ask these questions, okay? Don't think that people are idiots. They are not. They are very smart. And so there is this question. And there is also the question of, which is a question basically of accountability. Are they accountable for what they propose, etc.? And they don't have a secondary goals, etc., etc. But also, are they respecting our values? Okay, are they offering solutions that go against our fundamental beliefs? Trust is lost if this happens. You know, if you want to trust me, when, first of all, you see I don't have a secondary goal, you want to see I am accountable, etc., etc., but also you want to see that I have a lot of respect for your major core beliefs, okay? That I don't throw them away saying this is junk, okay? Which has been happening, unfortunately, in a lot of places where honor, male honor is important. You don't want to throw it away because they won't listen to you. So trust is also meaning respect, showing respect and understanding for the core values of these people, okay? This is what trust means, all right? And this is not just that, but that is an important part of that.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Actually, related to that, there's another question that what is the current state of research of norm matching involving religious actors? That would be a very interesting point because you just mentioned about the trust is also about the manner of behavior and also respect, and particularly in religious organization, the trust is very important identity for them. Let me ask the question to Andres first.
Awesome. I think, that is, and I don't know if Christina would agree, but I think that is an open field for research. I think, you can see, for example, Pippa Norris's and the late Ronald Inglehart work on existential insecurity and the role of religion as in a sense, a stabilizing mechanism, like an environmental form of, and particularly in my country, religion has been extremely important, especially religious organizations as networks for support through the most worst moments of the political violence processes. But what I think it's very important here is to understand something that Christina has taught us through her, especially on her book, Norms in the Wild, that basically if you want to make changes, you need to work within the culture, especially with authorities. And if you can remember that these local authorities are so important in order to be attained. And there was a previous panel this week about the role of negotiation and diplomacy. I think many organizations, when we're talking about building peace processes, leave aside these local authorities that can be very important to change networks within this local context. So I think this type of approach, understanding where religious beliefs can play a role of leveraging or becoming like local enhancers for peace are very important. But one last thing, I think it's very important to understand that the norm nudging approach could be opening the black box of something that I think most peace building making processes have been forgetting about. And it is important of like in a sense, taking people by the hand and societies by the hand to transition these processes. And as Cristina was saying, you cannot challenge those core values and ask people to make these leaps of faith while they need to be, in a sense, be reassured that the change from the violent situations or these sum-zero games into this stabilizing cooperation, a new situation, as in my country, in Colombia right now. I think the failure of our peace process has been that there was not any type of policy being brought in a sense, to get people to walk by the hand using those core values, as you were saying, Naoko, as a way to transit from violence to peace.
Thank you very much, Andres. Cristina, yes.
There is a very interesting question that, you know, is Cassidy Irvan that says, this seems to suggest that to care most about norms that emerge from within the in-group, church, party, country, but not from out-groups. Yes, exactly. Facilitating peace seems like it requires establishing norms around the treatment of out-group members, but often norms and moral rules aren't applied to out-group members in the same way. True. How we can use norm nudging to facilitate peace and cooperation. I think this is a very good point, because again, we, especially when there is conflict, there is a, to the nth power, in-group versus out-group conflict. Okay, you don't trust the out-group, you don't believe that they will behave well, you know, it's terrible. And in this case, I think that the influence of the media, local leaders, I've seen that in African countries with Muslim religious leaders and female genital cutting, for example. This is a totally different story because there is no conflict, you know, peace and security. But religious leaders played a crucial role in telling people it's not in the Quran. You know, genital cutting is not part of the Quran, is not a religious mandate. And people listen to their leaders, okay? And so, as Andres said, probably a lot of religious organization, local organization played a role in this transition, if you will. The important thing is, you know, they have in some sense to try to be more inclusive. What does it mean, inclusive? Try to include, and this is a crucial work from social psychology. In social psychology, they've done the fundamental studies of in-group, out-group conflict. What is their solution? Their solution typically, and you know, there are a lot of experiments that show that, is to try what they call superordinate goals. So try to include members of different in-group, out-group, different groups, to work together to create something that is of benefit to both groups, to both communities. So the important things local leaders, local organizations, etc., can work toward a process in which they include instead of excluding, but not include like, oh, let's be all friends. It doesn't work. You know, include by building something together where both groups benefit. So this is what psychologists call a superordinate goal. This is what should be done. That's my answer to that.
That's very interesting, Cristina. Thank you very much. We have other very interesting questions too. There are two of them. Let me just introduce one by one. So the first question is, if norm nudging requires trust and trust does not exist in a conflict situation, does this approach affirm, for example, the need to include women civil society early on the confidence building and promote bold targets on inclusion? Does this approach also mean that not including women and pushing for women's inclusion will result in a norm that excludes women?
Do you want to answer? I can answer.
Yes. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so it's very interesting because it's true that there has been disruption of comfort levels, okay? But, you know, I live in the United States, and what I found amazing is the acceptance or quasi-acceptance. Certain part of the population certainly don't agree, but overall there is an acceptance of gay marriage. Okay, there was something 15, 20 years ago, my God, gay marriage, etc. And how was it accepted? And I think the media played an important role, soap operas, etc., where there is the male friend who's gay and he looks normal. There is the brother who's a gay guy, he looks okay, etc. So they help people understand that it can be normal, it can be okay, there is nothing wrong to be gay, etc., etc. And let's say 20 years ago, civil unions, etc. Now, his question on women's rights and using a incremental approach tied to existing power structure. Are we imposing our assumption about the needs and views of local women? Okay. Now, as I said at the very beginning, you don't want people left behind. Okay. So I don't think that this whole movement to get better rights for gays, for women, LGBT, whatever, you know, is something that in principle leaves people behind. Not at all. But the important thing is to have enough sensitivity to people that think differently, that want a more traditional lifestyle. This is completely all right. The problem, I think, is that we tend to go overboard on the other side, especially in the United States, okay? And sort of try to impose, almost impose certain views, certain way of beings. You are politically correct only if you do certain things. And this is very dangerous because it will create an opposite movement. Okay, so we have to be very, very careful. Is exactly what I said at the beginning, to be very respectful of people's values, okay, their viewpoint, their belief. They are different from ours, sure, but we have to respect them and try to be inclusive. This is my answer.
Yeah, and just to sum up a little bit of a reflection there, empirically, you will see that when women participate in peace building efforts, those peace building processes are more strong. And I will say again about my country, that is the case that I really know. I would say that the failure is that we have not include women as the protagonists of the peace process, in terms of the, as Christina was saying, of the rendering part of it, like people seeing that this is, you know, the expected society that you're going to reach, right? But when you go to Colombia, you will see that women are very important because they're doing the peace building every day, in the, especially women that are reincorporating from FARC and other guerrillas that are, you know, basically building these peace processes, but nobody is showing it, right? So that's why you need edutainment, you need to tell these narratives and show them as the desirable future that can be feasible if society moves into that way. But especially, I think that, you know, there's evidence that tells when women are not included, are not protagonists, like social in terms of the public picture of what is going on in terms of peace building activities, peace building or peace processes go to failure.
I agree. 100%.
Thank you, Andres, Christina. The next question, and I would like to add my very, you know, amateur view about this behavioral science. So there is a question about the role of positive incentives play in norm nudging approach in peace and security. I would like to add one more question to it. So we just talk about 4 types of behavior and the decision making. One tends to make a decision based on more norms and morals. Other is more empirical. If we are targeting this norm nudging approach based on the assumption that there are a certain amount of people who will be motivated by morals and norms, then that's great. But then is it a bad idea to combine this empirical benefit-related message and also norm nudging approach? Is it kind of like a contradictory? Is there any harm doing so?
No.
Christina,
No.
yes.
I think it's a very good question. You know, sometimes I am not against using economic incentives. The problem with economic incentives, it depends on the situation, but you cannot keep incentivizing forever. Okay, so I give you two examples, one successful, one not. Incentivizing people to build, use and keep toilets clean has to end, because when you cannot pay forever, generations, and so when you stop, everything stops. Okay, while a very good incentive instead, very successful, was in order to convince the family to avoid child marriage and keep the girl in school until 18. They issued a bond, okay, that has accrues a certain interest. They put the bond in the bank. When the girl has finished high school, and there is a proof she did, they can take the money out, and usually they use it for a dowry. It was a very successful incentive, but again, it's very limited in time. It's very clear what you have to do. Is not going on forever. And so again, it was very good. Okay, so going back to incentives, there are good and bad incentives. You have to pay attention, you know, that you don't want to habituate people to get incentives and then they end and everything goes back. They have to be convinced. Now, norm nudging, you ask, can it be combined with incentives? Of course, because, for example, the incentives about keeping girls in school, there have been also quite a bit of norm nudging on talking to parents about, look how many other parents are doing that, are benefiting from it. And, they really approve of that, and so on and so forth. So there has been a combination of an economic incentive, because typically when you think of nudging, not norm nudging, you don't think of economic incentive. You use some psychological peculiarities of people in order to induce them to behave one way or another. Norm nudging is a little different because it uses social comparison. Okay, and norm nudging is not necessarily avoiding any sort of incentive, but the important thing of norm nudging is the following. The idea behind it, the assumption behind it, is the most important thing will be the creation or change of social expectation. This will be the motivating factor. If you want to help with some incentive, why not? I'm not against it, though they are short-lived, very well targeted, etc. But the important thing is that the motivation is social comparison. So nothing against that, but beware.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. We are receiving additional comments from participants that Abigail says it's extremely important not to allow male fragility or white fragility to restrict efforts towards human rights and justice. People should not have to wait for their rights until those with privilege are comfortable with sharing power. Kisidi also mentions that it's interesting that norm nudging is interdependent, but that facilitating peace between groups that disagree requires establishing a common community goal value between the two. The interdependent norm nudging approach in this case relies on the messenger leveraging independent moral norms. It's great that we are, okay, great. Christina, go ahead. We have 2 more minutes left.
Okay, Cassidy Irvine, okay. You say very interesting thing, and I agree with most of what you say. The problem is the understanding of what a moral norm is. Okay, a moral norm is completely independent. And I'm not saying we're not moved by moral norms. We are, okay? The important thing, you have to understand whether to decide to do norm nudging or not. is the target behavior, the behavior you want to change, is it morally motivated or not? For some people, it may morally motivated, that's fine. But if for most people is socially motivated, then you have to do norm nudging. So this is a decision you have to make a priori before you start deciding what to do. You have to understand what the majority of people, what motivates the majority of people, all right? So establishing a common community goal is great, but it's not necessarily a moral goal. It may be a very practical goal, you know, doing something together to achieve something. And I'm thinking more, not so much in moral terms, without underplaying the importance of morality, of course, but I am thinking of goals, of empirical goals, goals that people can do something and gain something by doing that. This is the important thing. It's not the morality, you know, being good or not being good. We cannot rely on people being moral, unfortunately.
It's great. Andres, if you have any last comment.
No, totally. I think we are, you know, like norm nudging being understood as a mechanism that doesn't do the trick in terms of magic, but it can help society's transition into peace. But as Christina was saying, you need to really have the I would say, not only the intuition, but the capacity to build some type of diagnosis that can really tell you what is the motivation of that violence, and then move into something that Christina mentioned, and I think is very important as a conclusion for me for this conversation, especially the importance that moving people out of conflict demands a change of beliefs, right? So the trick is being done there, where people can understand they can make themselves vulnerable to that outgroup that before was the enemy, and build this meta group that would be the best possible scenario in a peace process. So I think that's where behavioral science comes in, from a more complex approach, rather than understanding like this nudging traditional, I would say traditional, it takes like, you know, a lot of time, but especially the idea that we can induce people to do stuff, but rather than make them participants in a situation that they can, through exposition, through intergroup contact, build this new world that people aim to basically gain as a collective action effort.
That's great,
Excellent.
Andres. Christina, thank you very much. I think it was a great opportunity for us to hear your opinion and views. Although we tend to jump into this norm nudging approach, but it was quite refreshing for us to rethink that actually what motivates people. Is it really about norm? Is it also empirical benefit, social acceptance? And if that's a combination, how this combination is happening, what is the assumption, conditions? So it was a great opportunity to have this conversation with you. I know that colleagues have other questions too, but I hope that Christina and Andres can remain accessible. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining this discussion. And please enjoy the rest of Behavioral Science Week 2021. Have a great day and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.